Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Geeks with Wives and Capes, special edition, Convergence Revisited. Here with me tonight is my fellow co-host, Brad Bell. How you doing, Brad?
All right. Always doing great when I could talk some DC Comics and mega events crossovers with you, Agasicles, and I saw Jurassic World today, which I thoroughly enjoyed, and I'll have a review up for that on the site, hopefully by the time you're listening to this podcast. But just excited to see how we really felt about DC's Convergence.
Yeah. So if you're not familiar, if you're not coming here from the first podcast that we did, so Brad and I guess about 6 weeks ago or so, Brad did an initial round of this kind of fireside chat, talking about the first 4 issues of DC's spring event, Convergence, which centers around Earth 2, and committed to kind of reconvene after the whole event was over to kind of do a full wrap-up, evaluate what we felt about the second half, and then about the series overall. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get to it. So, Brad, let me hit you with the first question. And I think you have a longer list of questions for us to ponder
Absolutely.
than I do. So, but let me hit you with the first question right off the bat. If you know what? Actually, I take that back. I'm not going to lead with that one. So let's start with the final issue. Your review score was a 6.0, if I remember correctly. Is that accurate?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And I read your review. I didn't get a chance to post tail end comments on it, but it was interesting because you and we haven't been that far off. It's really been kind of an over-under thing, where one of us has been a point or two higher than the other. The final issue was probably the largest gap, I think, because I would have given the final issue a 3.0.
A 3.0.
A 3.0.
Oh my God. Wow. We are way off. Well, I mean, my thoughts on the final issue were I was torn. I think the final issue is a lot like Christopher Nolan's Inception. Was it a dream?
Okay.
Was it not a dream? Right. But it wasn't a dream that I dropped about $130 on this thing when it was all said and done. So that kind of sucked. But no.
Right.
Kind of the big mystery coming out of the final issue is whether or not, I guess it's not whether or not multiverse exists in the DC comics universe. I think that's pretty clear that it does exist. The question is, how important is the multiverse in the DC universe moving forward? How important is Earth 2 in the DC universe moving forward? Because in this final issue, we have this beautiful splash page that shows various multiverses throughout DC's history. And it's pretty clear to me, at least this is how I read it, that those were still intact. But I also kind of got the vibe that DC was maybe telling us, hey, they're here. We're wanting to let you know they are here if you actually care about any of these particular universes within DC. But we're moving on now. Like, they're out there, but we're moving on. And then maybe without the exception of the quote-unquote new Earth 2, do any of these matter? I'm just interested to see kind of how you read that.
So, well, like much of the series, like much of the past year's worth of events in the DC universe for me, I left that final issue fairly confused. And I think that's why I was so disappointed and would have given it such a low score. I was really looking for some closure with this, and I don't feel like I got it. Do the multiverses exist in the DC universe? It's hard to tell because first of all, it's so ridiculous as we're talking through this. The Convergence number 8 essentially ends by resetting the entire DC universe back to the revolutionary status quo that they put in place almost 30 years ago in the 80s. It basically wrapped up by putting things back into the positions everything was in post Crisis on Infinite Earths, the original. And you're going to have to help me. I mean, I was around during that time. I was reading comics during that time. It's a little fuzzy for me, but the whole point of Crisis on Infinite Earths, well, there are pieces of this that I remember very accurately. The whole point of Crisis on Infinite Earths, the original big event, which kind of sort of occurred roughly around the time that the first Secret Wars event was occurring in Marvel.
Ironic, huh?
Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah.
The whole point of that was that DC editorial and management felt that this whole concept of the multiverse and everything that they were juggling had just gotten way too complicated. Their fans were getting irritated, and it was a huge retcon reset button. And really what it was supposed to do was it was supposed to unify the DC universe and get all of the most interesting characters on a singular Earth in a singular timeline, and to kind of close off the access to the other Earths. So they destroyed a bunch of them, but not all. But basically, they set a status where travel back and forth between them wasn't really feasible or expected.
Yeah, and that's where you kind of got like Power Girl here, right? Because she's
Correct.
the older version of Supergirl, and she became a very popular character. But yeah, that I'm glad you brought that up. That Crisis on Infinite Earths, back when it was George Perez did the art, and Marv Wolfman wrote that story. Very big writer back in that heyday. But the thing about that is, I find it so ironic how this was almost the inverse of that event, while also kind of being very similar. So I guess it kind of is a unbalanced version of that event. We had in that event, Supergirl and Barry Allen, the Flash, they sacrificed themselves to keep order, to keep the whole DC universe from ceasing to exist, right? To destroy the multiverses, or at least most of the multiverses. And here in this final issue, these same characters that so many years ago prevented the multiverses from existing had to make another sacrifice. Only this time they do it with Lois Lane and Clark Kent and their new child, in order to, I guess, save the multiverse. If you're kind of reading that splash page the way I did. And I found it a bit ironic. I don't know if I would say it was distasteful, but I was just kind of shaking my head. What did you think about that, Agasicles? Those characters kind of doing the same thing.
Right. Well, what I found most aggravating about it was, and again, it's been confusing since last year, and there are definitely things that I missed. Because on the front end of Earth 2, World's End, and in New 52 Futures End, I wasn't on those books full time as far as my pull list goes. I wound up getting on board and following them near their midpoint. So I don't know where it got revealed, but a big part of my negative impressions of Convergence number 8 occurred when you hit that page where Brainiac basically says that there was a point at some time in the timeline, there was a point where everything that had been done in and around Crisis on Infinite Earths had been undone. Right? So that was the first thing, that he had done something that had unraveled that whole thing.
See, where I was a bit confused there, I guess, when I initially read it, and I had to go back and reread that part like 2 or 3 times, right?
Right.
Was at first I thought he was referencing Infinite Crisis, which did reintroduce the multiverse. But I guess the way you're reading it, he's talking about this version of Brainiac. We'll just call it Brainiac Prime here. Yeah. He did something that undid all that stuff, right?
I think so. Yeah, and I'm actually pulling the book up now to kind of back over those last few pages.
Yeah. And
but yeah, I mean,
yeah, it is a very convoluted, I think would be the best word to describe the event. It's a convoluted book full of very good character moments and some very, very good tie-ins. And I just felt like it's so funny because I'd been kind of in the middle on this whole event. I thought it started out strong. I was in about the 7.0s, the first 2 or 3 issues. And then, wow, I get to issue number 6, and I gave it a 9.0 because that book really pulls you in by giving you something that's been completely void in the Convergence event to up until that point, as the New 52 continuity, as it was called then, or the DC Prime continuity is being impacted, where you see Supergirl, you see Superman of our main DC here seeing Telos, and Telos is converging up on our Earth, right? And I'm like, wow, this is going to be consequential in some way to what's going on in DC once the new DC publishing, the DCU, YOU publishing initiative starts. And that really made me think, wow, it is consequential. And I thought it was so funny because you and I did that last podcast, and the big last question we asked one another is, will this event, when we come back and do tonight's podcast, be consequential? And I read that issue and I'm like, holy shit, this thing is going to be consequential. And then at the end, I don't know if it really was, but that issue really pulled me in because it just as much cool stuff was happening in and around Telos as was on the main DC Earth. And then we get into those final 3 issues, man. They just kind of fell apart there at the end.
Right. So going back over these pages of Convergence number 8, and this is about midway through the book. And the specific thing that Brainiac says is, he says, the first crisis, it's too strong. If it is not changed, the multiverse will once again collapse into one universe. Now, and then his follow-on action to correct whatever the problem is to send Supergirl and the Flash back.
Yeah, okay.
So the only way I can interpret that is something happened with the original outcome of the first crisis, and the sacrifice that the Flash and the Supergirl had made was undone. And so whatever the point of the first crisis was, like I said, got kind of dismantled, and that's why you have the Flash and Supergirl from that timeline and that Earth present in Convergence.
Mm-hmm. And they had to go back and do the same thing, essentially, right?
Exactly. Except this time, I think, as you mentioned, along with them, Brainiac sends back
the Kent family, pretty much.
The Kent family and Parallax. And now this is the Kent family, I think, from a different Earth, and Parallax from a different Earth.
See, I thought, was that, here's what I was thinking. So before New 52, right, Lois Lane and Superman were married. That was the way it was in DC. That was the status quo for that Superman book before the New 52. So I just kind of read it as that being pre-New 52 Superman. Now, it could be completely wrong, but that's just how I read it.
So what you're really saying is it's Superman before
Flashpoint.
Before Flashpoint. Right. Okay, gotcha.
And I thought that was like Parallax. Like that was Parallax before Green Lantern Rebirth, before they brought Jeff Johns brought Hal Jordan back in Green Lantern Rebirth. That's when he went on this big Green Lantern run, right? When Green Lantern really was like a top 10 book for like 4 years. But before that was the whole Parallax thing with Hal Jordan. And I thought that's who it was.
Well, and this is part of the problem. And this is part of the reason why Convergence is so difficult to understand and so convoluted, is because now in my mind, it was supposed to be about nothing but multiverses.
Mm-hmm.
So, but but there are things that occur in the book that make it feel like it's not just multiverses, but it's also time. Like for all that it's supposed to be about multiverses, there's a crap ton of discussion about timelines throughout the book, and I'm like, so is it same Earths with different timelines, or is it truly extra dimensional Earths?
See,
So regardless,
I, I'm just, my jaw is dropping because I'm thinking about physics, and I'm not I've taken college physics. I'm not some professor. I mean, I teach history, not physics. But like, you have the whole thing with multiverses and physics. We're with different timelines, right? And if you've watched Fringe or a lot of science fiction shows, and if you read comics, they explore that concept that, oh, I was dating this girl, but if I would have stayed with this girl, we would have had kids and a family, and somewhere out there's that version of me, but I didn't do that, so I'm this version, and there's infinite versions. I kind of just read it as that, even though that's probably not what it was supposed to be, right? Like it was supposed to be what you're saying.
Right. In terms of how DC, at least the way I've interpreted DC, refers to multiverses, it's Earth in a number, and those Earths coexist, separated dimensionally by a vibrational attenuation, right? That and this is how you get like the whole storylines of like the Flash being able to travel between dimensions by vibrating the cells in his body till he gets to a point where he side slips into a different universe. But at any point, I always felt like those universes were finite, that they could be. I mean, I know it says infinite Earths, but that they can be counted and assigned a number, and that they're not spawning. Again, I know that runs counter to the title of Infinite Crisis on Infinite Earths, but that they're not spawning based on every single, potential binary outcome of a decision that any one of 4 billion people on Earth can make at any point in time, right? I've never thought about it as being that fragmented.
And I never did too until Convergence, which kind of changed my outlook on DC's multiverse, which I don't know if that was maybe Jeff King's new writing or a new direction for the multiverse. I don't think that's what it was. I think it's just how I interpret it. But I don't know. You just said you interpret it the same way, that it's different times. So that was extremely weird and not really in line with how DC handles their multiverse. You're absolutely right. But you brought up that whole Brainiac thing. Like you read that panel. And he says something happens where this was undone, right? We have no idea. Yeah, we have no idea what that is. No idea. Right. That's like off screen. Like the number one rule, whether we're writing a script or a comic book, and God knows I'm not a writer, so I'm just talking about this stuff. But don't tell me, show me.
Right.
And do a couple pages of flashbacks. I don't know. You just show me what happened. And here's what I'm afraid of, Agasicles, is they don't know. They just said it. They don't know what happened. It was just written in. Or they're planning to tell that story in another 3-issue miniseries, Convergence Continued, or some crap like that.
Right. Or we've just interpreted it incorrectly. And I know, and I get it. I'm pretty confident that there's a chunk of people out there right now going, the science doesn't matter, it's irrelevant. You guys are getting wrapped around the axle about details. But this is the same thing I said on the initial Convergence podcast, which is, if it doesn't matter, then don't shove it in front of my face. Yeah. Like, it only bothers me because you made a deal out of it. Not you, but the writers DC. I'm like, I could have completely accepted that this could have been that these are all a bunch of MacGuffins just kind of thrown up to maneuver characters into new positions, but it wasn't. I feel like it wasn't painted that way.
Well, they made a big deal out of it, so you would go buy it. If they didn't make a big deal out of it, we're not going to go out there and drop $4 a week on it. But right. I had a question for you. So we talked about characters, and I said, one of my favorite characters last time was Telos, and we get the person who is also a planet as well, right? But we get to the point where Telos fights Deimos, and Deimos is portrayed as powerful, if not more powerful than Telos. But they're going to have this final showdown, right? And it's really built up well, and they kind of go back and forth, and I'm like, I'm into this, man. Here's these two like all powerful beings getting in a knockdown drag out. I'm like, this is a fitting conclusion. I just want to see. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what comic books are about. You want to see good triumph over evil. I wanted to see Telos defeat Deimos, and here comes Parallax.
You're right. You're rolling at this point. You're rolling back to like issue like 5 or 6, right?
No, that was like issue 8. I think is what I'm talking about. Issue 8 or 9.
No, the thing I think you're building up to, which is this whole, there's this huge workup about this fight between Telos and Deimos, and then Parallax just rolls in like out of nowhere and just thumps Deimos into non-existence.
Yeah, issue 7, because I named the title of the review "Hallow Jordan."
Right.
Yeah.
And I read your review and I felt the exact same way. I'm like, if he could have done that, why the hell didn't he do that back in like issue like 3 or 4? As soon as the domes came down. I mean,
yeah, he just shows up and he's like, "Okay, you're dead. Now we need to find something else to do the next couple issues." And like after, I think that is when the event floundered. Like right there, like at that moment, that any hope we had of Convergence at least having a conclusion, a climactic conclusion, was just dead in the water, and so much is left up to interpretation. And I read an interview, and that's just not me saying that, because I read an interview with Dan DiDio, who was like the along with Jim Lee, is like the co-chief executive officer of DC Comics. And they asked him, it was Comic Book Resources asked Dan DiDio, is DC still a multiverse company? Do the multiverses exist? Or are they just out there? And he's like, it's all up to interpretation. Like, I think it's different when you're talking about a publisher who has ongoing weekly titles, some of which are vested in Earth 2, which is a multiverse, right? It's different for that to be left up to interpretation than it is like a one-off film like Inception to be left up to interpretation. He brought up Inception as an analogy. That's not just something I'm saying because I love that movie. And I don't know, it kind of rubbed me the wrong way. Like, Earth 2 matters, obviously, because you're launching a new book called Earth 2 New Society, right?
Right. And I agree with you. I mean, Inception works being what it is because it's a one-off. And of course they end Inception with leaving the room open for a sequel, but and maybe that'll happen, but it primarily works as a one-off. And I agree with you. I don't think this whole thing of like, every time you see something occur that you would normally think is interconnected to another thing, that there's this huge guessing game of, well wait, is that the Batman at this point in time, or is that the Batman at this point in time? Like, and again, I understand that there's this huge movement about, you shouldn't be so wrapped around the axle about continuity. And I think that works. I think there are fans of, comic books as a genre who like encapsulated standalone things. Me personally, I'm not like that about anything, right? I mean, when I read sci-fi fantasy books, I read trilogies and chronicles and things that tell this larger, more expansive story of things that are connected. When the television shows that I get the most into are the television shows that take an entire season. Like, you kind of look at Arrow, right? And the show that I bring up all the time, which is Angel, and essentially what those shows do is over 22 episodes, they tell a single unified story. And that's just the kind of content that I get into. So I mean, I know we're going to come back around and kind of talk about what's our projection of kind of where the DC universe is going and how do we feel about it. But that's the kind of thing that makes me nervous, because again, just historically, it's not the type of content that I latch on to.
Well, I think there's different extremes when you talk about breaches in continuity, because it can be something as small as, wait, Wolverine was supposed to be here at this point in time, but in this other book, he's here. Like that kind of thing, I don't really have a problem with. This comics, I can get over it, right? What I can't get over is something like Batman, Jim Gordon Batman. And I don't think that's a spoiler now. It's pretty common knowledge that Jim Gordon has become Batman after the events of Batman number 40, which I won't go into, but needless to say, Bruce Wayne is unable to don the cape and cowl. And so I'm reading DC's current big event, which thank God at least is contained within its own book, which is Dark Side or Dark Seed, however you decide to pronounce it, Dark Seed War. And that's Batman as far as traditional cape and cowl. Bruce Wayne, Batman is in that book, and he's in the Justice League. And at the same time, we have over in Batman number 41, RoboCop, Easter Bunny, Jim Gordon Batman, roaming the streets of Gotham in a mech suit. And it's pretty clear that it's a pivotal storytelling moment that Bruce Wayne cannot be Batman at this time. So, like, that is a big, big jump, man, because it was a big deal what Bruce Wayne did in Batman 40. But over here, Bruce Wayne, at least as far as we can tell, is still Batman. How does DC explain that?
And I'm on board with you. Like you said, there are these minor continuity disconnects, which I agree you just have to accept if you read comics, right? You just have to not be wrapped around the axle of, hey, look, this month in Spider-Man number 28, he's out in California visiting Mary Jane. You can't be wrapped around the axle about him appearing in another book that same month, right, in a different geographic location, because the continuity just has never been wired that tightly. And yes, I completely accept that, but the whole concept of now continuity just doesn't matter. I think that's another end of an extreme that I really worry about. But let's I want to get back a little bit to character in Convergence number 8, because my thing about the Convergence event is, if you can't be satisfied with the structure and how it relates to the DC universe and its continuity, then your only other off ramp is to be interested in the characters that are presented. And I think you and I both have agreed that there have been points where there have been characters that have really we've really attached ourselves to. One of my primary problems with Convergence number 8, and again, the reason why I would say it was a 3, is, again, a lot of that falls apart. Dick Grayson had been built up. Great Scott, since last year, right? Since 2014, they've been building
the Earth 2 Dick Grayson.
Right. They've been building him up, and there's been this impression that his human spirit and his compassion and his empathy were going to somehow be pivotal in the outcome of Convergence. And I really felt like in Earth 2 and in kind of this revisioned Justice League that they kind of put together, that Dick was supposed to play kind of the role that the Martian Manhunter does in the new 50, in the historic Justice League, and that the Vision plays in the Avengers, where they are these two examples of human spirit and ethos that really always understand what people are really driven by character-wise, and also are the ones who are kind of the holders of the definition of what structures like the Justice League are supposed to be, right? And in issue number 8, there's like a one-liner flash in the pan about Dick Grayson's empathy or compassion, and then they just blow right past it. There's a point where I hear like Dick gets angry, he's unsympathetic, Brainiac, and it's either Brainiac or Tellus who tell him, like, Dick Grayson, don't lose your compassion here at the end. And that's it. That's the only time Dick Grayson's relevance to this entire thing is ever addressed, and it literally takes place in the space of one panel.
Yeah, and here's what I'm hoping, because yes, this has been portrayed and built as a Earth 2 Dick Grayson story, like you're saying. At the end of Convergence number 8, right, we see that basically Telos, the planet, is the new Earth 2.
Right.
And they're going to rebuild that, and it's gonna, I guess that will be kind of the focus of that new book, Earth 2 New Society. And I think that Dick Grayson is still can be that character that he's been built up to be in establishing what they want the new Earth 2 to be and represent. And I think that hopefully, that the compassion that Dick Grayson has been shown to have will shine through in the establishment and the protection of that new society.
Okay.
But as far as this book, you're absolutely right, man. Parallax ended up being more important than Dick Grayson, and that was just disappointing.
Right. And can we talk about, so you mentioned that thing where, there's the setup to this revision Justice League is going to kind of rebuild this planet, which has been regrown, blown away and then kind of regrown over for them. And at that point in time, that Justice League are the only people on the planet. But then there is an interstellar call or whatever from the inhabitants of Earth 2 who had fled, and they reestablish comms with them, and they turn around and they're now on their way back. And I guess Green Lantern actually went out and like touch base with them. Can we talk about? I don't know if I'm going to be able to put it, but can we talk about this panel?
I can see it a little bit on the camera, but
right. Where
spell it out to our listeners.
Clearly, I'm talking about, if I can do it without touching my iPad, I'm talking about this one here, where it clearly looks like either a shot from Battlestar Galactica, the TV show, where the entire fleet is transiting, trying to find a new Earth, or it looks very close to the Rebel rendezvous at the end of Star Wars: The Empire Strikes Back. But I mean, it literally exactly artwork depicting one of those two scenes, and it's just, again, what frustrates me a lot about Convergence is there are these instances where things that they could probably see it better with your paper.
Yeah, I have the paper copy here. Like, I'm a Luddite, old school here.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that frustrated me about Convergence is there are just these kind of very tropish call-outs to things that have been done before, and just kind of they're kind of kitchen sink junked into this story, especially in Convergence 8, kind of a wrap. But yeah, that was just very, Convergence number 8 was sticks out of my mind because it's supposed to be, the wrap up, and as readers, we're likely to remember like the last piece of that content that we touch. And maybe saying that, maybe this event will be something that does read really well in a trade.
I mean, but I read it weekly from 0 on.
Yeah, no. I agree. I don't think it will make that much of a difference, but yeah, man, it's a problem. So maybe we talk now about if you had to rate the entire event, what would you score it as an event?
I mean, the character moments are so good. That's what we've said this whole time. When we say rating the entire event, Agasicles, are we including the tie-ins or just issues 0 through 8?
I would pitch just 0 through 8 because I think the tie-ins are something separate.
Okay, well, 0 through 8, I'd probably give this event a 5. A 5.0 out of 10, and that's a bit below of what I rated. Most every issue was in the 6.0, 6.5 range, with that one 9.0 for issue I guess 6 being the lone exception, issue 5 or 6, I think. And yeah, probably about a 5.0. Great character moments, moments that really shine. They kept us in Middle Earth too long, which I was just bored by that whole storyline. So you're ripping off Lord of the Rings, you're ripping off The Empire Strikes Back by the time this thing's over. But at the same time, you have like these heartfelt moments with Thomas Wayne and Bruce Wayne of another universe, or between Thomas Wayne and Dick Grayson, or you see Dick Grayson losing his children. And it's just great heartfelt moments, just kind of undercut by just nothingness.
Right. And it's again, the comparison between our scores is always funny because I would say the exact same thing. I would rate the overall event a 5.0. Just and when we say that, I'll just say again, we mean that in terms of the actual Convergence books themselves. And it's a lot like a movie, right? It's a lot like where there are good pieces of a movie, but then they completely tank it with like the climax, right? And I kind of feel like that's what the final issue did. I'll also say, kind of like I think you're mentioning, I would say that the event was stronger. It's a really weird dynamic because I feel like the core book was stronger in the first half. It really gets weak after Thomas Wayne dies.
And you didn't even read the 0 issue, did you?
No.
And see, that was like one of the better issues. It really set this event up well and accessible. And man, the artwork was because Ethan Van Sciver did the artwork for that whole issue. It wasn't like a 1,800 artists rotating for every single line like the final issue. But like it was beautiful, man, and like all the different Brainiacs, the Ethan Van Sciver, I'm not exactly sure how you pronounce it. However, he portrayed that, man. That was a stunning issue, and I don't know, it dropped off not only from art but writing, like from there on out.
Right. Well, and what's funny, what I was going to say was, it's funny how that dynamic is opposite when you talk about the tie-ins, which is kind of why I didn't want to score them lumped in, because I feel like the tie-ins. Well, first of all, the tie-ins I think were the best thing about the Convergence event.
Absolutely.
And I think the tie-ins really hit their stride in the number 2 issues.
And can I say real quick, because I know we're about to get into the tie-ins, I want to give a shout out to DC for one thing. They kept these tie-ins limited to 2 issues. And thank you, because it saved money on our wallet. We knew what to expect. They were up front with that from the get-go. Whereas Secret Wars, man, some of these, like Renew Your Vows, we don't even know. Like it could be 6 issues. I've seen some of these 6 or 7 issues in Secret Wars, and some of them like A-Force and Old Man Logan, they're going to be ongoings out of Secret Wars. So I'm glad that DC at least steered us in the right direction as far as tie-ins go.
Right. And I think it kind of forced writers. It forced the creative teams to tell a story and wrap it up in 2 issues, which I think it's always good when you put constraints on yourself as a writer. And the other thing I liked about the tie-ins is it really gave some opportunities for some classic characters from the golden age of comics, the 80s and 90s, to kind of make their way back to the front. And they actually brought a lot of those creative teams back. Like Marv Wolfman actually came back and scripted a few issues of characters that he had created. So there was a Blue Beetle tie-in, who was one of my favorite characters, because when I was collecting comics in the 80s and 90s, like that Ted Kord version of Blue Beetle, that's when his number 1 issue actually came out. And there was a Booster Gold tie-in, which unfortunately I didn't read, but I just thought that was really awesome. But what were some of your? I'll throw it. So for me, the Blue Beetle tie-in, the Action Comics tie-in, which was the Power Girl Wonder Woman fight, what was it? was Blue Beetle Action Comics and the Catwoman tie-in, especially the Catwoman tie-in, which just told, man, I mean, you don't know that Catwoman. I've never cared about Catwoman. I think this was one I did a review of for the site.
Yeah, yeah.
But man, the way that story ends, you just really like, holy crap, I love Catwoman, right? Like just out of nowhere. So, and the Aquaman tie-in had some bumpy roads getting to where it needed to go. But I think when I look at the two issues across each other, I thought it told a really good story. So, what were some of your favorite tie-ins from the event?
I'll go through what I read, and I'll give you my thoughts here. I didn't read them all because I'm not a billionaire like Casey Walsh. I read The Flash, and he fought a Infinite Earth Superman. It was like from Earth 9000 and something. But, pretty cool little fight scene, and they alluded to the Flash making a sacrifice to save the multiverse. So it was kind of a looking back, I didn't know, but now I know that it was a tease for that final issue, right? So it was okay. I mean, I'd probably give that series like a 6.0, 6.5. Now, my favorite one was Detective because we had God, this was so awesome. Now, the art was a little wonky by a guy named Cowan, but it had the Huntress who had become Robin pretty much, but I guess she was still going as the Huntress, and Dick Grayson, who was Robin, but he was thinking about transitioning to taking over the cow and cape, and he hadn't yet. This was in a future where Bruce Wayne had passed away, and Huntress and Dick Grayson had to kind of, carry on the mantle of the Batman and his legacy. And the dome drops, and all of a sudden they're transported to Soviet Russia, where they have to deal with Red Sun Superman. So we have Dick Grayson and the Huntress against Red Sun Superman, and that was just really cool. It was a whole lot of fun. I enjoyed that. And actually in Action Comics, we kind of saw a lot of the same thing where it was dealing with Red Sun Superman and how the Soviet Union would have dealt with this all-knowing God as he was in Superman Red Sun, written by Mark Millar. Stalin had to kind of figure out a way to fake Superman's powers because his powers was gone and the domes had fallen and all that. So it was really cool to see Stalin and Superman work together, and Lex Luthor was involved with all of that. So that was neat. That was Action Comics. One of my favorites besides Detective was Superman. What a great love story for Lois Lane and Clark Kent. It shows the birth of their child in the second issue, and man, this is like my Superman. Like, this is the Superman that I read before the New 52. This is the Superman that stands for truth, justice, and the American way, with the red trunks and the spit curl, and just his undying love for the people of Metropolis, but not only that, the people of the world. Although his child is being born, he is just as focused on saving innocent lives as he is the birth of his child during this Convergence. I read Speed Force. It was a fun, witty, wonky title where we got to see Wally West and the Flash kids, Jay and Iris, kind of race Fastback the Duck and take on they got to take on Flashpoint Wonder Woman. I read Green Arrow Convergence, which was a bad story. I'd give it about a 4.5 probably. It focused on a relationship between Ollie and his illegitimate son, Connor Hawke, just kind of boring. The worst one I read was Convergence Atom. Man, it was a terrible version of Deathstroke, terrible version of Ray Palmer. Just not a good story. I'd probably give that in about a 3.0. But yeah, overall, Superman and Action Comics probably, and Detective Comics were my favorite. But if I had to pick one Convergence tie-in, I'll have to say, looking back on it now, making a final switch here, I'd say Superman was, because, man, that was, like I said, my Superman. But that's enough about the tie-ins.
All right. So you had a list of a few topics that you kind of
Yeah.
wanted to run down.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I wanted to talk about Convergence kind of being a placeholder event for DC. We all know that DC is moving to the West Coast. They have since moved. Now, they had started moving a few of their offices out there to from New York City to Burbank, California at the beginning of the year, but the heavy hitters were moving there during the 2 months that Convergence went on. So the speculation is that Convergence was written far in advance to just kind of be a fan service as far as the tie-ins go, giving different people their favorite different versions of DC characters they love. So a little bit of fan service there. But it was this big weekly event that was pre-plotted, pre-written. Notice now maybe we understood why Jeff King wrote it, because they had all the main DC writers working on stuff that was going to define DC after Convergence with the DCU YOU initiative. But Jeff King got those in the can. They could send those out. They stopped all their main monthly books. It was all Convergence tie-ins for 2 months. And all this really was a big rigmarole to get them moved out to Burbank, Agasicles. What do you think about that? Do you feel any worse that you spent so much money on this book now?
No, I mean the move. I mean, things like that happen, right?
Yeah.
And I don't begrudge the industry for that. The notion of a event being scripted out and written and kind of in the can before it ships. That's kind of normal ops for the
Yeah.
industry. Like, I mean, creative teams typically write, a whole arc, before it goes down. It's not unusual for writers, as a script, not necessarily down to the specific issue, to kind of script out a whole year's worth of issues and stories and kind of what's going to go on. In this day and age of where the ongoings are kind of all kind of hammered out preliminarily, to fit into the framework of a 4 to 6 issue trade. It's almost kind of how they have to be. They have to be kind of pre-canned. So that doesn't bother me.
That's normal, though. But having a TV writer come in and write a big event story who's never written a comic book ever is not that normal. I can't.
Well, I don't know.
Instance of that.
Well, I mean, they handed Marvel handed Charles Soule the Death of Wolverine, and Charles Soule definitely had a banner year in 2014, but that was really his really first big year, and the guy is a lawyer by trade. So I don't necessarily feel that it's that highly unusual, particularly if he was being brought in. Again, yes, the move was concurrent, but particularly if he was being brought in to script this story while a lot of the key talent at DC was pre-staging the follow-ups to that. Right? I don't necessarily, even if it's unusual, it all sounds very sane to me as a business strategy. Again, in terms of the video game industry, where now you have 3 different teams working on Call of Duty, and they each kind of roll from year to year. So each team now gets a 2-year development cycle. That kind of stuff makes sense to me. So that doesn't bug me. And I don't necessarily know that I would put at the feet of Jeff King the blame for Convergence.
No, absolutely not. We talked about that on the last podcast. Like, this guy was handed the keys to something that, he didn't have a lot of experience telling stories in this medium, and this was a massive story that they wanted him to tell. It's not like they said, hey, write us a generic 8-issue Superman story. where he fights Lex Luthor. No, this was like he had to study his DC history just to get to where he got on this event. So I agree with you on that, Agasicles. If they would have never moved to the West Coast, would there ever been a Convergence? That was my thing. I don't think there would have been.
I mean, do you know how long that was in the works? Because here's my thing. Like I've said before,
Yeah.
the build up to Convergence to me started through a series of multiple events that started in 2014. So, excuse me. So Earth 2, Worlds End, New 52, Futures End, Multiversity. I mean, all that stuff was spooled into this big build up that lands in the beginning of Convergence. So. Did they know that far back that they were going to move the entire offices? I would think that it wouldn't be unusual that they would.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't know. All right. We'll move on. They're in the West Coast now, and let's talk about the future of DC. That's what I really want to talk about tonight, just as much as was eager to talk about Convergence. So New 52 is over. Convergence has signified the end of that very successful that started in 2011 publishing initiative where they launched 52 new number ones, some of which have been great, some of which have come and gone. Now the new thing is DCU, because I've said it a few times in this podcast, YOU. So what DCU is a more progressive, updated, non-continuity driven version of the DC universe. And what happens here is we have some titles that are just going to be good jumping on points, like Batman, Justice League, Wonder Woman, going to be 40 issue 41s. Then we have about 20 or something so brand new number ones, all the way from Bizarro to the Midnighter to Constantine, which is now Constantine the Hellblazer, to Black Canary, to Harley Quinn and Power Girl, to Damian, son of Robin, to Cyborg number 1 in July, to Weir Robin number 1, which focuses on groups of street level Robins. So what do you think of DCU, Agasicles? Agasicles, what do you think of DCU, especially picking up from where New 52 was at?
Right. It's just another set of branding to me. Um, in an era where much of the branding that has gone on at both Marvel and DC has been arguably unnecessary, particularly ineffective, um, and ultimately probably forgettable. So we had Marvel Now, we had
All
like
new Marvel now.
oh my gosh, like that all new branding, particularly is the one that particularly spins me up because I'm just like, you started the numbering over. You don't really need to tell me that it's all new, right? But the new 52 in DC, and I get the application of the new 52 labeling in the wake of Flashpoint. It's just, did we really need that branding for 40 issues? I mean, over 3 years. I don't know. So the only thing I could say at this point, because probably with regard to comics, they're probably the medium that I'm most forgiving of in terms of, when they need to make a significant course change and kind of redecide how they're going to mold the entire universe. I get it because for whatever reason, I think it's largely by choice, not entirely by requirement, that the comic book industry is chain locked into maintaining certain properties in perpetuity. So I get that if if I'm going to have to tell stories of my same roster of 20 something characters for 50 years, then every 3 or 4 years I kind of have to flip the script and tell the story of the greater universe slightly differently. So I get it. I just
I think the way that Marvel is approaching it, because Marvel is going to match DCU with something bigger that's coming out of Secret Wars. called All New, All Different Marvel. And I was listening to their editor in chief, Axel Alonso, talk the other day. And he said the way he views it as, let's take Marvel Now, all new Marvel Now, and then all new, all different, which is the new thing launching probably at the beginning of 2016, because it looks like Secret Wars is going to have a bit of a delay and be stretched out because it's selling so well. Is he views it as the same continuity, but he views it as kind of different volumes or different seasons in a TV show and good jumping on points, and they're still going to reference one another. Whereas DC, I find it interesting that it's kind of different, as in some of the continuity that has come before matters and some of it doesn't matter. So they're very kind of, as much as they're reflective of each other, they're very different publishing initiatives.
Yeah. So put in that context, I'll say comparing the two, I'm more concerned about Marvel. Um, my feeling about the Marvel universe is that I feel like they were kind of, winding themselves up to be in a pretty decent place. Like I was pretty happy with the stories that were going on in Marvel, and it seems like almost for no good reason they're tearing it all down. Like I felt there were good Hulk stories going on. I feel like there was a good Captain America story going on. I think it was interesting what they were doing with Thor. I think it was interesting what they were doing with Superior Iron Man. I felt like the approach they were taking with the Avengers, while a little convoluted with all of the different teams calling themselves of the Avengers, I felt like I was okay with it because they were intermixing. They had Cannonball and Sunspot in a version of the Avengers and some interesting things going on. And then all of a sudden, they decided to do this event that's titled the same as the event they did 30 years ago. And what they're doing with the Marvel Universe, at least right now, appears to be incredibly destructive. And I still don't have my mind wrapped around like how in the world do they get back to any sense of normalcy from this.
There's going to be 60 new number ones Agasicles when Marvel relaunches.
Right. So I'm just despite everything that we've said about Convergence, I'm more confused about where Marvel is going and more concerned. Now with the DC universe, I'm comfortable that I kind of have a good feel for where the DC universe is going to end up.
Yeah, and speaking of where they're going to end up, like DCU, a lot of people has been seen as kind of a reactionary initiative, because you had Marvel at least embracing more diversity than DC with their characters, like the new Miss Marvel being Muslim, Kamala Khan, and things like that. And you had Spider-Gwen, which was, even though that was an alternate universe, they really pushed that book, and it was, front and center with their publishing and marketing and things like that. The Carol Danvers, Captain Marvel by Kelly Sue DeConnick is a big book that they really push. So female-driven, minority-driven characters. You had the whole thing with Bobby Drake, Iceman, kind of coming out at the end of Brian Michael Bendis's X-Men run here very recently. And DC wants to be more diverse. They want to reflect the times that we live in, which are a little bit more liberal and progressive, as time tends to do as it moves forward. And how do you feel about that? Just DC coming out in one big lump and kind of admitting, they didn't say this, right? But by what they're doing in their books, kind of admitting, hey, we haven't been diverse enough. We didn't push minority characters enough. We didn't push female characters enough. When we did push female characters, maybe we pushed too much cleavage, not cleavage. That Cleveland Cavaliers on my mind. Maybe we pushed too much cleavage. And instead, now you look at the new cover of Starfire #1. She's very covered up, very modest. I just want to know how you feel about the DCU, and is it a good lump update of that universe?
Yeah, it's tough because I guess I didn't feel that way about DC. Admittedly, Marvel might arguably be doing more. I mean, we've been having this discussion on our own staff, right, about Marvel's the perception that Marvel. I won't say the tendency that Marvel has to kind of put it in your face, right? Say, hey, look at what we're doing.
Yes, yeah.
Now, different ones of us have had different feelings about that. I've been the one that's gone on record as saying that's just a necessary, negative that we just have to come through. That's going to have to exist for some period of time. DC, on the other hand, I feel like they, right,
The new universe with the very modest Starfire. So now DC's doing the opposite.
right. But I feel like DC has had, across those two universes, I feel like the strength of female characters in the DC universe has historically been better or more. Um, Despite the way that Power Girl is dressed, she's clearly not a hero to be underestimated.
Right.
You've had the Huntress, you've had Catwoman. I mean, none of these females in the DC universe I've ever felt were damsels in distress, right? Whereas I feel like in the Marvel universe, maybe with the exception of Storm and Rogue, they've kind of all still kind of been that damsel in distress kind of character. So it's nice that DC Universe is going that way. I felt like with the history of having like John Stewart and who's the I was thinking of, but with having John Stewart and the Wonder Woman of the New 52, and even going back before, I've always been on record as saying, Wonder Woman is the one who, when stuff comes down to it, and like a villain just needs to be killed, go back and look at the history and look at all the times that it's been Diana Prince who's come to that conclusion, and done the dirty deed, right in many cases. So,
have you seen her new outfit though, Agasicles? She is covered from head to toe. I mean, it looks like a tracksuit. Like, I mean, I think we need to get. I mean, I say this as a male, so take it with a grain of salt. But I mean, you don't want to be revealing and provocative, but it's okay to show a little skin. Like, there's beauty in the human body that these great artists can portray without taking advantage of how they portray women in comics.
Sure, but I'm okay with them pushing the redesign of costumes forward. Again, with the New 52, especially and specifically in the DC universe, there's been a backlash about the costume redesigns. There's been a little bit of that in the Marvel universe too, with them over there kind of aligning them like they do in the movies. But in the DC universe, it hasn't bothered me. Like, and I respect what you said about like you liking that version of Superman, but like the whole thing of like the trunks, the underwear being on the outside thing, like I've never like since I was 8 years old, that has always bugged me. So I was so happy in the New 52 reboot that all of that went away, and characters have male characters have uniforms that are just monocolor, from shoulder to their boots. So I was happy with that. Now, Wonder Woman didn't get that much of a redesign in the New 52, just in terms of how her costume was put together. So if she's getting a makeover, I'm completely fine with that.
Yeah, and you can actually read 8-page previews of all these books at dccomics.com/DCUYOU. And Agasicles, kind of what I wanted to end on was I'm going to list a few, not all, but I'm going to list a few of these number ones from DCU. And they're launching between June 3rd, which was 2 weeks ago, all the way up until July 22nd. And I want you to tell me, 2 or 3 that you are really excited about, or you may just be willing to pick up or put in your pull box for 1 or 2 issues to give it a chance. Okay.
Okay. All right.
We have Batmite number 1, Bizarro number 1. All right. We have the Hellblazer number 1. So that's Constantine. We have Ur2 Society, number 1. We have Red Hood and Arsenal Team, number 1. Starfire, number 1. Black Canary, number 1. Dr. Fate, number 1. Justice League of America, number 1, which is Brian Hitch doing the art and writing. Robin, Son of Batman, number 1. Let's see. We have Harley Quinn and Power Girl, number 1. And we have, I'm just going through the number 1s. We Are Robin, number 1, and Cyborg, number 1.
Okay.
Now,
So,
Martian Manhunter, number 1 as well.
Right. So I'm looking at the list as well. I'll just shoot out the ones that I'm interested in. No idea whether or not I'll pick these up and actually read them. Constantine the Hellblazer, number 1. Earth 2 Society, number 1. Red Hood Arsenal, number 1. Dr. Fate, number 1. Absolutely one of my favorite characters in the DCU. Justice League of America, number 1. Martian Manhunter, number 1. That might be, I guess, Green Lantern, the Lost Army, number 1.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So it's maybe Cyborg, number 1, but he's quickly becoming another one of these characters that to me is like Wolverine, where I get it, I appreciate that he's different. It's neat what he brings to the table, but the whole catapulting of him from being like a Teen Titan to all of a sudden being a founding member of the Justice League, and them centering so many stories around him, just feels like a thing where like the marketing and the sales impetus is driving what the character becomes a little more than I'd like.
Yeah, and that's Cyborg's being pushed even in like Fisher Price toy lines, man. Like he's being pushed everywhere. The one I want to read, Constantine the Hellblazer, Starfire. I'm really looking to the return of Damian and Batman, Son of Batman. I'm looking forward to reading that. I love Damian Wayne. And there's a part of me that wished they'd have just let Grant Morrison's work just kind of rest and let him have ended Damian, but he's too good of a character to just, leave dormant. But a Weird Robin sounds like an interesting concept. It's a street gang of Robins, people who are inspired by Batman and the idea of Batman to kind of become their own version of Robin. So it's a very different kind of take on that character. So there's a lot of good stuff here. Yeah, I also wanted to read the Arsenal and Red Hood. So go ahead and pick up, even if you have no interest in the character whatsoever. If you're listening to this before June 17th, which will be this coming Wednesday, pick up Harley Quinn and Power Girl number 1, because anything Harley Quinn ends up being worth a ton. Okay, she's so popular right now, and any number 1 with her would be worth a pretty penny.
Oh, I missed that. I actually thought those were 2 different number 1s.
No, they're together. They're a team book. It's Harley Quinn and Power Girl number 1.
So I might pick that up because I am a Power Girl fan.
Yeah, and I just think of reading Convergence. Even though I missed it at my shop, he didn't have a copy of it. I really want to read Earth 2 Society number 1. I don't know if I'll stick with it, but I want to see where we're at.
You're right, and I have to laugh because I have to say that is a good thing that Convergence may have done, is as janky and meandering as it was, if you stuck with it, you're now invested in those characters, right? And you now have a piqued interest to see what happens to them and where they go.
Yeah, and I've just been I've been so back and forth with my comic buying habits because I buy a lot, and a lot of that has to do with the podcast. And we're at kind of a crossroads with every couple years, like we have something like Marvel now or New 52 or DCU or whatnot, where it's jumping on points, or for some of us who buy a lot of books, dropping off points, right? And my whole life I've been a Marvel zombie. I bought Marvel. I've been invested in their universe. I know it like the back of my hand, right? And DC has kind of been that way with Batman and the Justice League. But as far as knowing the universe inside and out, I don't know it quite as well as I do the Marvel universe. And with all those number ones and everything with the all new, all different Marvel, I've really thought about just finishing out Secret Wars, which has a tie-in to so many books I grew up reading as a kid, right? Like House of M and books like that. Just kind of dropping out of Marvel altogether and just sticking with
shifting to DC.
just all DC, because I'm kind of like you, where you were talking about continuity and you want things to connect. But if I'm going to really be vested in something, I'm going to be vested in it, right? So I'm torn between, do you really just read the characters you love, which has always been my advice to people getting into comics, or do you vest yourself heavily in one universe or one publisher? I'm kind of like, I'm sure Marvel's going to tell great stories, don't get me wrong, but I feel like all the best Marvel stories are going to be told through the movies, and everything that they're going to tell in Marvel, I mean, I feel like I've seen it all by this point, you know?
And it creates an interesting potential paradox. I don't think this will happen just because, you know, comic book readers by and large tend to stick with what they know and have loved. Like there's a huge moment of inertia amongst comic book buyers. It's very difficult to get comic book readers, and I may have said right. If I said writers just before, I apologize. There's a huge moment of inertia around comic book readers, and it's very difficult to get large numbers of them to migrate or move to reading something different. But you know, my feeling is I feel like this, like these Marvel Universe and DC Universe reboots are a lot like Windows Vista, right? And what I mean by that is, when Vista came out, a lot of people said, "Hey, you know, this is such a problem, and learning it is so difficult that if I'm going to learn something new, why don't I just go buy a Mac?" And that's how you get a lot of percentages of people moving over.
Yeah.
And this is kind of the same way. You know, if you're going to reboot the universe and I'm not really sure if it's the universe that I'm going to like, I can either double down and go back into Marvel or back into DC, or I can jump over and take my pull list and allocate 50% of it or more to a different universe. And, you know, what I'll throw out there is, you know, in particular, the Valiant universe,
Oh,
but
yeah.
also, Image is wildly popular now, but that's not really tied together as much of a universe. But you know, things that are going on in Zenoscope with the Grimm stories, and I want to say Boom, and there's just a lot of kind of second tier, third tier publishers that are really doing things or tying their universes together, especially in Valiant. Where they're starting to have their own events now and things like that. And I'm like, about where Marvel's going, maybe you don't go back into the Marvel reboot, you know. And
Yeah.
I wonder how many consumers are going to start migrating to some of the smaller label publishers in the wake of some of these reboots.
Well, when those promo images came out for the all new, all different Marvel universe, we had Ben Grimm, the Thing, on one, but he was wearing a new Guardians of the Galaxy uniform. So I believe we had X-23 as Wolverine on one. But other than that, any characters that were owned by Fox were really missing, right? And if you're telling me as Disney / Marvel, or as Marvel, however you want to phrase it, that they can say to their blue in their face that their films don't dictate what they do on the comic book pages or what they do in their marketing. But when they're telling toy companies to not make X-Men toys or statues or Fantastic Four toys or statues, I'm just going to have a real hard time believing that. And I'm glad you brought it up earlier in this podcast, Agasicles, when you said that people have had a problem with the suits in the Marvel universe and the costuming reflecting those of the movies. And I've always liked my comics separate from my movies, right? And I feel DC has always been Warner Brothers, at least for all of my life pretty much, Warner Brothers has owned DC, right? And I never feel like they've really let film impact them on the pages when they easily could have. They've always kept that separate. Now, maybe that changes with the new Batman v Superman and Wonder Woman and Justice League movies coming out, and I'll have to eat crow. But it just feels to me that they really keep those things separate. And to me, comic book storytelling is the purest, most intimate superhero medium above TV shows or movies, because you're not seeing Grant Gustafson play the Flash, Grant Gustin. You're not seeing Christian Bale play Batman, or, you know, Patrick Stewart play Professor X, or even as great as Robert Downey Jr. is, play Tony Stark. This is the character. And a great writer can really make it feel even more real on the comic book pages than a great performer can in a movie. And that's just me personally.
Right, right. And, you know, in Marvel's defense, I think this is the first time in their history where they've really gone after this concept of cinematic universe and the paper universe. Well, because this is their first cycle of movies where they have really owned these films. Right, in the past, it's always been things that they've licensed out to third parties. So, but yeah, I get where you're coming from.
But, you know, it's personal prerogative.
All right, man. Will you want to go ahead and wrap up and take us out?
Yeah, absolutely. You can find my work at geekswithwives.com. You can find me on Twitter at The Real Brad Bell, REEL Brad Bell. I should have a review of Jurassic World on the website, which you can find by the time you're listening to this podcast. You can find me most Thursday nights on the Geeks with Wives and Capes podcast, talking comics with Casey Walsh and Will, and a rotating guest from time to time on that great podcast. Agasicles, where can the good people find you?
So you guys can find my stuff on geekswithwives.com, also on my Google Plus page, which is under the same name, Agasicles Stamas. On geekswithwives.com, you should find my review of the NVIDIA Shield Pro Android TV/gaming console. That just went up tonight. A lot of hardware coverage has been increasing, and you should also find the first 2 episodes of our tech podcast, Geeks with Wives and Bits.
And I think that's going to wrap it up for the Convergence cast. And until next time, we are out.
Boom!